Good evening, Christopher Fenter. Welcome to Life in a Garden Online. It's fabulous to have you with us this evening. Thank you for joining me and everybody else.
Thank you, Mandy. Hi, everyone.
Can I call you Chris?
You may.
Okay, because it's shorter than Christopher.
I realize that, yes.
Chris, so it's just, I think we need to just tell everybody first that you don't still ride your scooter, or do you?
Only up and down the road, 50 meters or so.
Okay. How did you get the name The Scooter Guy originally?
Well, I had a collection. I was an enthusiast and a vintage Vespa collector and enthusiast for so long. You know, we all have a hole in which we throw our spare change into, and mine was a collection of old Vespa scooters. So I was always known as Chris the Scooter Guy, because when you phone someone and you say it's Chris speaking, Chris is quite a common name. They often say, which Chris? And my response was always, well, it's Chris the Scooter Guy. And that obviously, you know, told them who it was. And then once I lost my sight, I started being referred to as Chris the Blind Guy, and that just wouldn't suffice. So then the name it was kind of born, the Blind Scooter Guy. And so, yeah. And I still fiddle and play with the scooters and do little restorations and projects and services and things like that for fun.
When did the passion for scooters start? I mean, how old were you?
I was, I think, about 35, and I decided that I want to do something awesome. I'd been working for almost, about 18 years. I'd been having, my career was a professional chef, and I was absolutely tired of sweating in the kitchen, and I wanted to do something different. So I decided that I'd like to be a writer, and I'd like to write about travel and adventure, but I wasn't good enough to just write a story. So I decided, no, I have to live a story first, and then I've got a story to write. And I originally thought about doing a trip around South Africa to the most western, northern, eastern, and southern points of the country, perhaps by donkey cart or a solar powered car, something like that. And when I looked at the logistics behind that, I realized that it's virtually impossible. Solar cars just weren't that advanced yet. And a donkey cart, well, just to get past the SPCA and to actually be fair on donkeys, it wasn't going to happen. So I started scratching around for something else. I just needed to create a story. And that's where the idea to look at an old vintage Vespa scooter first came. And once I bought one and started tinkering with it, I just bought the second one and the third one and kind of got addicted.
Have you always been an adventure junkie?
I've always, I say that I blame it on my parents, because I was shoved into Boy Scouts, and you know, the parents get the kids off to Boy Scouts and things like that to get rid of them.
How many badges did you have?
I had all of them. I was a Springbok Scout.
Yeah.
You had to ask that, yeah. So the thing about you know, parents now today, they throw an iPad in front of their kids as a way of babysitting. But in the old days, they sent us to Boy Scouts, and they put on records. And I had records by with Enid Blyton stories, the famous 5 and the Secret 7 and things like that. So I always had that spirit, that kind of spark early. And luckily, I got to travel quite a bit in my youth. And yeah, when you start traveling, you just become addicted. You just want to travel more and more.
Where did you grow up?
I was born in East London, in the Eastern Cape. And I spent the first 4 or 5 years of my life romping the Transkei. And then I went to school in Joburg.
Shame. Good thing. So where did you guys live in Joburg?
So I lived in Rivonia, and I went to Sandown High School.
Okay.
And when I finished school, well, at the end of standard 8, I moved back down to the coast, and I did 9 and 10 in a year correspondence. And I've been kind of a roamer of the globe ever since. The last 10 years been settled in Cape Town, but pretty much worked all over since then.
Chris, tell us about your adventure, your Vespa adventure through Africa with your friends.
So that was my first trip. Was a trip around South Africa, and that was a very successful trip. And we raised a lot of money for the Red Cross Children's Hospital. the trip went really well. It was myself and just one guy. And when you're on one adventure, you start to think and plan about, for the next one, because you don't want it to end. So I thought, well, what if I do a Durban to Dublin ride? Now, my parents were living in Dublin and working in Dublin at the time, and Durban to Dublin sounded cool.
It does sound
But
cool.
of course, the Red Cross Children's Hospital here in Cape Town, so it ended up just becoming a Cape Town to Dublin thing. And my parents had moved back to South Africa from Dublin by the time we got there, so it ended up just being a Cape Town to Dublin trip. Ironically, there's a children's hospital in Dublin called Our Lady's Children's Hospital, which is, there's a lot of parallels between it and the Red Cross Children's Hospital. They're about the same age and they go through many of the same challenges, as do many pediatric healthcare service providers in Africa. So the plan, by the time we departed, the plan was that we would visit children's hospitals, homes, and all sorts of pediatric healthcare service providers through the continent of Africa and across Europe and in the UK and over to Dublin, and give them a bit of publicity, because 4 guys on scooters is going to get a bit of press. Let somebody benefit from that press. That was the idea.
How does that work? How did the funds come in?
Well, so there's something called donor fatigue. So when an organization contacts a newspaper and wants to talk about their latest project or something that's going on, it's really difficult for them to get their message out, because people get tired of it. I myself was somewhere, I think I was in Malawi, when I got an organ donor foundation email on my phone. I was like, crap, this is not going to take up my data, delete. They need to have interesting things happening to get their story out. And we certainly were an interesting thing. And not only that, but we obviously had big companies that sponsored the project as well. So Pick n Pay was one of our big sponsors. And there was just, you can look on the website, but there were so many different sponsors and people that made pledges. So we not only raised funds, but perhaps more importantly, we gave them an opportunity for press. Not only the Red Cross Children's Hospital and Our Lady's Children's Hospital, but all these little organizations in between. I'll give you an example. Camp Hill Village, which is in Botswana, just outside Gaborone. On the day that we were there, they had the local TV channel come out and record this thing. And part of it was, of course, their director or rector, whatever you want to call the person, talking about the home and talking about why we came to visit and seeing us with the children. So it just gave them an opportunity to get a bit of press that they would definitely not have had if not for our crazy visit.
And how long does it take?
So the entire trip was an 8-month trip. We crossed 20 countries, no support vehicle, and we traveled 30,000 kilometers, because we didn't just go straight up Africa. We zigzagged all the way from Cape Town to Dublin.
Most memorable experience?
Goodness me. The most traumatic was when I got sick in Tanzania, and that was, that's a big thing that I remember, because it was such a trying time. But there were so many beautiful things. I really found Malawi to be a very beautiful country. And when I got to Italy, I kind of fell in love with Sicily. I almost say that I don't believe in reincarnation, but if it exists, then perhaps I lived in Sicily in a past life. I felt more at home there than I've ever felt anywhere in the world.
You actually look Italian.
Thank you. Many people say that. Yeah, Sicilian, eh?
Yeah,
my Sicilian friends will all watch this one day and they'll be like, yeah, I should have had my cupola hat on and that for this video.
Tell us about getting sick.
Yeah, so I contracted bilharzia, and probably from somewhere northern Lake Malawi. I got food poisoning in. I was dehydrated, and my immune system got really run down. And nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And I jumped around trying to get help in Dar es Salaam, which is, it's a tough place to get help unless you have
place to get sick.
It's a tough place to get sick, and it's a tough place to get help. And ultimately, the options for me were to pay a $5,000 deposit so I could be seen at the private clinic which dealt with expats, or to fly home to get help. So I flew home, and the doctors again did some tests, and they said, "Oh, you got bilharzia," and they gave me a pill for that, and a course of antibiotics, and a bunch of rehydration stuff, and said, "You're okay. Go and finish your trip." So I rested a bit, and by then the guys had gone further on, and it was difficult for me to get a scooter back to them. So I flew to Paris, where I managed to get a loan scooter, and I traveled south, and then I met them at the top of Africa when they crossed over.
By yourself? Wow, that must have been hard.
So I missed out on traveling through 3 countries with the other guys, but I ended up traveling quite a lot more kilometers. At the end of the day, we all did different distances because we took some different routes and things like that, but between 25 and 30,000, and I was just over 30,000 kilometers. So I ended up having to double Europe, basically from the one side of Europe to the other and back. And then when we got to Dublin, I still rode that scooter back to Paris as well to return it to the loaners. But the whole time that I was in Europe, I wasn't well. Something was not right, and the doctors hadn't got it right. So I thought that I just need to get home and have a little bit of a rest on the couch, and some chocolate and some nice braai or two, and I'd be fine. And yeah, I was wrong.
Were you married yet?
Myself and Tamlin were together. We were living together, but we weren't married. And we, when I got home, it took me about 6 months to fall apart. My plan originally was to propose to her in Dublin and have her fly over. And then when I got sick, there were so many more expenses that we incurred that the idea of her flying to Dublin just had to be shelved. And when I got home, I did propose to her, and she said yes. So we were engaged at this point. And yeah, then I went through hell. I went through medical trauma, MRIs, lumbar punctures, chest x-rays, and the guys just couldn't figure out what was wrong. And I literally was juggled around and bounced from like a hot potato from one hospital to the next, from doctor to doctor. I spent so many hours sitting waiting for doctors, and by that point I couldn't walk anymore. I was being pushed around in a wheelchair. I was falling apart, good and proper. And then I sat on the couch one day at home on the sofa, and I'd been telling the doctor that I had picked up these little floaties in my eyes, and he looked in my eyes, but of course he's just a doctor. He looks at your eyes. He doesn't look at your retinas behind your eyes.
Yeah.
And the next morning I couldn't see. So I then got to see an ophthalmologist, and he took one look through my eyes, and he diagnosed the virus, and he said, go and have a blood test and we'll confirm it. And next thing I was at Groote Hospital, which is where you go, because if you want the best ophthalmology, that's the option. And they were sticking a needle in my eye a couple of times, and I was blind. They told me, we'll save your life, but you're going to be blind.
What a dreadful thing to hear.
Yeah, it was tough. And the guy who told me was a real dickhead as well.
I think anybody who tells you something like that, there's probably no easy way to deliver it in the first place.
No, he didn't have a very nice bedside manner. Maybe he had some of his own issues going on in his life, but he was quite, he was a little bit too direct, and he wasn't very compassionate in any way whatsoever.
Have you ever had dealings with Dominic Giampaolo, the neurologist?
No.
He's the guy you just described. Absolutely.
Yeah. Look, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and perhaps he was, just having a bad day at the office and everything. But him shouting at me when I was trying to ask him what he was doing, sticking a needle in my eye and things like that, he's on my hit list. It's just
for the next time you're driving your Vespa down the road.
Yeah.
Okay, so now your life's fallen apart. You've got this woman who loves you. What's the next thing you do?
Well,
besides fall into a black pit of despair.
Well, that was the plan. The plan was to jump into that black pit, really, but I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't move. I couldn't shower myself. I couldn't get into the bath. In fact, I was so dizzy when I stood in the shower that I'd fall over. So I had to bath. So I had to get helped in the bath, and I'd literally just lay there it was really, really tough. I couldn't do anything. My world had come to an end. And it, probably just as well that I medically was so weak and so unable to move around independently, because I might have done something stupid. And yeah, I recovered slowly but surely. I learned about accessibility, which was a word that I'd always heard thrown around, but I'd never really taken the time to understand what Google describes accessibility to mean. It's when a product, a device, software, a service, or an environment is specifically designed with the disabled in mind. So I learned how to use a screen reader and how to use a phone and Bluetooth keyboard with voiceover and things like that. And I got back in the kitchen and I started cooking things. And then I decided it was time to write the book about my story, my Cape Town to Dublin story. And that turned out to be quite a process, because writing a book is not just the writing. That's only 10% of it. It's then a few runs of editing.
So just for the purposes of the other people in the room, tell us about how you communicate with your computer.
So I use a screen reader. I use a MacBook or an iPhone, and basically the reason I use that, I was always avidly anti-Apple, and in fact on a trip we were sponsored by Nokia, and I thought that Apple devices were for hipsters with moustaches and drinking frappe lattes with Havianas and skinny jeans, that type of person. And I was anti-Apple. If anything, I was resistant to them. But if you're blind, Apple is the only really way to go, because although you have other programs that you can load onto Windows machines, the software that Apple has is all on board already, and it is so intuitive and so good. So when I navigate my way around a screen, I use the arrow keys. I obviously don't use a mouse. With a phone, I flick between left and right, and as the icons move from one thing to the next button icon is highlighted, that's the thing that will be selected when I either double tap the screen or press enter. And then when I go into a text document, as I type, it tells me what letter I'm saying. So if I'm saying hello, it will say HELLO. And when I hit the space, it says hello. And there are techniques that you can eventually use to edit and to change things. And it was a learning curve, because I, pre-going blind, was a guitar player that looked and took care to choose one or two chords, and now I play perfectly. And I was a keyboard typist that tick, tick, tick with 2 fingers and looked at the buttons. And now, obviously, I type really, really fast. And my first book was 165,000, just over 165,000 words. So I got it right after that.
That's a very, very wordy book.
It's a big book. It's a big story. It's a very, very big book, but it's a very big story. It's it's basically, it was my life story really up to that point, up to the point of going blind. And then the scooter trip was there were 4 parts to the book. It was pre-trip, Africa, Europe, and post-trip. So I had to learn, not only how to live, but the right thing to do was to share that as part of the story, because I kind of felt at the end of the book I'd been put on this new path. So,
and what is the new path?
Well, my book started selling well. I started getting onto a stage and speaking about my adventure, and then realized, hell, perhaps I need to continue having adventures, but if I'm a blind adventurer, maybe that would be interesting, because traveling today offers so many different obstacles compared to in the past, but also so many different rewards. Because people think, well, it must be so much easier today because you've got Uber, Airbnb, and things like that. But it's actually a lot more difficult. In the past, people walked with these wooden, hard-soled shoes, so you could tell where they were coming from a long time, from at least 100 meters where you could hear them coming down the street. A horse-drawn cart, you could hear that coming from a kilometer away. Today we have electric cars, and
Make no
there's,
noise.
there's there's challenges. And yes, in the old days, if somebody had to, if I was a traveler in the 19th century and I had to go knock on someone's door in the middle of the night, they'd probably invite me around and tell me to come in and have a place to sleep and have a meal on them. But today, I'd have the armed response arresting me. So
Or
it's a
some little
different
old
world we're
lady
living.
with pointing a gun at you in a mall.
Yeah, I read about that today. It's crazy, yeah.
The memes are fabulous that are already out.
Yeah, well, yeah. Feel sorry for both parties. They're crazy. Yeah.
Christopher, can I ask you one of those personal questions? Is it true that your other senses begin to compensate? Not that there is any compensation as far as I'm concerned, but...
So sight, I like this question. I'm used to this question. I've got the answer. Sight accounts for between 75 and 85% of your used senses, of your used RAM when you are processing the senses. So when you don't have that memory used up, you can focus on the other things. So yes, they do feel like they're heightened, but there's no spidey bite or anything like that that gives you more hearing. You just focus on it more because you don't get the quick response from looking at something. So I, for example, sometimes hear things that other people don't hear, and my sense of smell specifically, people wouldn't believe that you use your sense of smell, your sense of feel to navigate, but I might be walking in a town and then I'll smell something, a certain flower like a lavender bush, for example, when we enter a park. And then when we're coming back to the exit, I smell that lavender bush again and I'm nowhere near in the exit. Or I'll feel the wind or the sun on my face in a certain direction. And then when we're coming back, I'll know that I'm going in the opposite direction. So I use the four remaining senses way more. So the answer is yes, but no. So they're not heightened, but we use them more. We have a lot of freed up RAM that we can focus. That memory is not wasted on sight.
And what about a seeing eye dog?
What about it?
Do you have one?
No.
Because I don't know how you get him on the Vespa.
No, I actually just heard a good joke about a seeing eye dog. A blind guy goes into a bar with his seeing eye dog. He picks the bar up and he picks the dog up and he does a 360 rotation around. And everyone says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm just taking a look around." The thing about a seeing eye dog or a guide dog, I've got 3 dogs already, and they're very boisterous. So it would be very difficult to bring a guide dog into our home. I've always got assistants. I've got Uber. I travel a lot, and it would be unfair on a guide dog for me to be away from it for long periods, specifically for international travel, if I'm traveling for speaking, anything like that. And most importantly, I think there are other people that could use them more, that need them more than I do. So at this stage, I haven't had one. But down the line, who knows?
Because you're obviously a fairly decent Samaritan in the terms of the way you think. So your adventures are sponsored and aimed at, helping others primarily. But you have an explorer that you use as your sort of icon, I suppose. 19th century blind traveler.
Well, yeah. So basically, one of the first things that happened after I'd gone blind was that I discovered Audible and audiobooks, which are fantastic. And one of the first audiobooks that I listened to independently was a story by Jason Roberts called The Sense of the World, which is the kind of unofficial bio of James Holman, who was a blind traveler. He was the first known blind traveler to circumnavigate the world. And he did all sorts of wonderful things and had all these wonderful trips. And his first trip was a trip between France and Italy. He was British. And I thought, well, let's go and mirror some of the things. Let's go and step in his footsteps, and that will give me a story. So my first book done, I decided now it's time for book number 2, which is also quite a break. And this was the story of my journey in Holman's footsteps. So he did all these crazy things, like he climbed an active volcano, he climbed Mount Vesuvius, And I desperately wanted to climb Vesuvius, but Vesuvius is no longer open to the public to climb. So I climbed Etna, which is almost double, a little over double the height of Vesuvius, and it also happened to be erupting, albeit lightly while we climbed it, but it also was snowing. And Holman went and paddled a fishing boat on the Amalfi Coast. So I went on the more modern version of that, which is a sea kayak. And he hiked in a forest, and I hiked in a forest, and ironically, we both got lost unintentionally as well. He rode horse, and I chose a tandem bicycle, a side-by-side tandem bicycle in Tuscany. And so basically my second story, again, the reason that I did this was to create the stories, because I'm not good enough to just thumbsuck the story myself, was a look at modern day travel, and in places just touching on Holman's travel, just going to some of the places he went to and seeing, yes, I said seeing things in a different way today compared to how he would have seen them back then in 1880 something.
Did he write his own story, or was it a biography?
He did. So that specific book is a biography, but he was a published author in those days, but his writings are long gone. But he was quite a remarkable guy. There's even a river named after him here in Africa.
The Holman River?
Yeah.
Where is it?
It's in the Congo, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so he inspired you to go out and do great things.
He inspired me to go out and have the first adventure that I'd have as a blind person, and look at the world today and write about how it was traveling today versus traveling in those days. And yeah, he gave me inspiration to actually go out and create another story.
How do you think he felt as a blind person taking on a world that didn't have things like Audible and, you know, computers that speak to you and stuff like that, having to rely on other people so much?
I can't say how he felt. I can only tell you how I believe that he felt, and that is based on what I've read about him, is that he was quite a happy guy. He was frustrated at times, as I am today. There's no difference in that. But he had this yearning and desire for independence, but at the same time, he made a bit of fun out of his situation, because that's, you know, how else do you just deal with it and live with it and accept it? Because if you don't, well, you know, life is going to be quite tough. So he, for example, when he arrived in Cape Town, he wanted to travel the South African coastline, and there was no way. So he left the docks, because in those days, of course, you know, it's sailing. And he left the docks and he wandered up to an area called Pardon Island, which is where all the horses were kept. Pardon, Part, Pert, and managed to buy a horse and got a guide on another horse, and he went on horseback all the way to Durban and back. So that certainly wouldn't be the case today. For me, I would catch let me not choose an airline that's gone bang, but I'd just get onto a flight and that would be it, or do a road trip. So travel today is most certainly a lot easier, but when you're at a destination, the way that you experience things is very much the same.
We landed in France and then caught the train to Paris. And then when you come out in Paris station, it's absolutely mind-boggling. I actually don't, I mean, I felt kind of overwhelmed, and I'm sighted. And I actually just leave it to my friend to work out where we're going in the navigation, because it's completely mind-boggling when arriving in a place like that. It's busy, there's trains all over the place.
Yeah, France is tricky. And one thing that I do when I travel, and it's also something that Holman did, is he chose smaller places. So, for example, we flew into Catania, we flew out of Toulouse, we didn't go to Rome, we didn't go to Paris, although I've been to those places before. You know, perhaps if I hadn't, I would have visited them, but I think they would be very overwhelming, and yet surprisingly, people are very courteous and they are helpful. They do go out of their way. And in France, if you're a blind person, you get really, really good support. If you're on a train and you're blind, you're going to have an official basically riding with you, helping you on and off and things like that.
That's pretty
about a
amazing.
train in South Africa.
It's not likely to happen in South Africa, I'm afraid.
Maybe it does. Who knows?
I mean, you don't avail yourself of those courtesies?
I'm lucky. I'm lucky to know how to use the Uber app, and generally have someone to drive me. So I haven't climbed on a train yet. Mind you, I did actually climb on a train in South Africa. One of my little micro adventures, because I don't only have these massive adventures. I do have little adventures. I traveled with the Rovers Rail from Pretoria to Cape Town, and I wrote a story for them, which is the luxury vintage train.
I know. The rest of us would love to get onto Rovos. Unfortunately, I can't afford it.
Yeah, it was interesting. So it wasn't a case of affording it. I was on as a writer, as a guest, and writing a story about the experience as a blind million visually impaired people in the world, and a lot of them do travel, and we should open our tourism market to that group of people, because let's face it, we're cheap, we're safe, we're a beautiful destination. So the Rovers Rail were obviously interested in having someone that was blind experience the trip and write about it. It was wonderful. And my wife, Tamlin, which had become my wife since then, luckily got to join me and enjoy the trip with me.
And then did you and Tamlin go on another trip after that?
So when we were on when I was on the Sicily to southern France trip, Tamlin was with me, and not to entirely navigate, which was just me, of course, but just to join me on the trip, basically as my sighted guide when I needed assistance. And at the end of that trip, we decided that we had drank a lot of French champagne, and we'd had a good time, and we'd seen all these families in Europe, and every family that we saw had said to us, "Why do you not have a bambino of your own?" So we decided to have a baby. And that was young Tate, who was born a year and a half ago, who is the little boy sleeping in the room next to me right now, and is now 19 months old.
Mazel tov. Have you listened to the Roald Dahl books?
Thank you.
Do you have a collection of Roald Dahl books? Because
Oh,
I
yes.
have a. Have you got a CD
Yes.
player?
I think we still have a CD player, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I have a collection of CDs with Roald Dahl books. I'll send them to you.
Cool.
Nice
Yeah,
to
take
play
it
them.
like that.
Yeah, no, I'll do that. But it's on
I'd
CD,
like that.
so one needs, the good old-fashioned CD player type thing.
I think a computer, Tamlin's old computer still has it. My MacBook doesn't have that. No, it does. I think it has a CD-ROM. Yeah. Cool.
Christopher, you have an adventure coming up. What is that?
Well, we're halfway through it already.
Oh, are we? How did I miss that?
So I started on the 1st of January this year, 2020, the wonderful year where everybody is having many other challenges other than just sight. And so my trip is called Blind versus 2020. So 2020 is, of course, a year, but it also means having perfect sight,
Yeah.
which I personally don't. So given that we just had a young child and I needed a new story for the next book, I decided that I should have a local adventure rather than gallivant all over the world. So an area that I've been fascinated with is the area between the Breda River and the Berg River. So these two rivers, they start together in the mountains near Ceres and then have a natural watershed close to the town of Wolseley. And one goes out to the Indian Ocean at Witstrand, and the other one goes to the Atlantic Ocean at Leiplek. So I thought I'd traverse the length of these two rivers as well as the entire coastline. And originally I thought, well, I'll just get a buddy and we'll do it on a Vespa scooter. But that wouldn't make for a very good story because we do that in about maybe a week. So I decided that, having not ridden a bicycle since I was about maybe 10 years old, I'd get onto a tandem bicycle and I would do it by bike. And having not kayaked since, other than the short stint on the Amalfi Coast, since I was at school, I decided a tandem kayak would work. And then I got a footwear sponsor, and so I decided bike, boat, and boot, as well as beast, because I had another big fear. if you remember, I told you Holman rode horse, and I avoided that and went on the bicycle. Well, that's because I'm poop scared of horses. So I decided that a blind adventure by bike, boat, boot, and beast would make for a good story. And
to overcome
unfortunately,
your fears.
halfway through this adventure, lockdown happened, and everybody's lives changed very suddenly.
How did you cope with lockdown? As I see it on the radio today, that they're saying level 1's coming up in a week or so.
That would be nice. Look, I mean, I'm used to isolation. I all of a sudden had to share my space with people. That was frustrating, but I used all my scrap timber, and I built a bar, and I built a bench, and I baked lots of things. And it was a frustrating time because I was not able to be out there completing my adventure was also 2,020 kilometers in total, just so happened to work out that way. And I'd literally completed the Cape Town cycle to that 109 kilometers the week before the lockdown happened. And I'd done a hike up on the West Coast, and I'd done a few things, and then I thought it wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't possible. And then, of course, here in Cape Town, things got better a lot quicker than they did. Well, they got worse and then got better a lot quicker than other areas in the country. So we were able to get out there. So I've now managed to catch up. I managed to face that beast, and I went and did a day-long ride along the beach on horseback.
Oh, wow.
And I've done a few big walks, and got a couple of exciting things still coming up, and then I'll finish hopefully definitely before the end of the year, but I'd like to try to finish everything by the 31st of December, and preferably sometime in November. And then next year I'll write the book again. And as we said earlier, the writing is only 10%. So if that takes me 6 months, take another 6 months to edit, typeset, do the whole graphic design. I mean, it's a process. People don't realize it's a massive, massive process.
Christopher, what gets you out of bed in the morning besides your bladder and your child?
Goodness me. I guess I'm a curious person. I'm inquisitive. So I want to know what's going on. I'm excited to wake up. I'm not a person that wakes up slowly. I wake up and I'm wide awake and I get up. I still cook, so I do all the cooking at home. And that's snoring in the background. It's my dog, by the way. That's my Cocker Spaniel, Isabella, that's snoring, not me.
We've managed to keep you awake so far. Yay!
Yeah, and so basically, I just, like, it's literally what gets me up in the morning is get up and go. I just want to do things. I struggle to lie and sleep. I think a person also told me that a long time ago that the sooner you get up, the sooner you get your metabolism going, the sooner your energy levels are going. You shouldn't have a slow start to the day, because then the whole day will be slow. So I try to eat something very quickly, just a bowl of cereal or a little bit of yogurt, and get going. And what gets me going in life is the desire to discover and just have cool things happen, so that one day I can sit on my strip and tell my boy about all the things that I did do rather than the things that I wished to have done.
Okay, now I want to know about in the kitchen. Okay, so your life started, your career started 18 years as chef. What kind of food did you cook?
So my culinary career started in the hotel, and I'd actually gone to the States and studied marketing management before. So I used that as a way of getting into development work. So I kind of did what Gordon Ramsay does in one episode. I do in a few months. I go into a kitchen and I train staff, and I set up a supply chain, implement whole new menus, do staff training, and just basically all aspects of running a catering business. So if you, for example, had to buy a hotel and you knew nothing about food, I'm the guy that would come in and get your restaurant going to spec. But my specialty was working in remote destinations. And I suppose that was a little bit of a way of keeping the adventurous spirit alive in me. So I worked a lot in the Caribbean. I did a short contract in Croatia, but I've worked in the Cayman Islands, worked on St. Helena Island. I've been to the Falklands, Ascension, Belize, Barbados.
Jeez, you are a world
Visited
traveler. Wow.
all over the show. And then also did quite a bit of, you can call it locum work, relief chef work. So if somebody on an oil rig, for example, had to fall and break their leg and they need to go and see the doctor, then I'd come in and work for a week in that situation. And I guess it was a way of just keeping that adventure alive and spirits alive and just not being home.
Didn't you like being at home?
So I do now. I desperately yearn travel. I long for the, I don't know. I find it comfortable when I'm amongst interesting people, when I'm walking in a French market and I have all those smells and tastes and sounds. I find that I'm at ease. I feel like I belong in that environment. Or if I'm standing on a beach on a point where there's a lighthouse in the middle of nowhere and I can smell the smack of the sea and I can hear the waves rolling over the rocks. That for me is living. But yet I do like being at home. I do. I suppose comfort has a different meaning for everybody. For me, comfort is being at home and having doses of having a route, having a base, but having doses of adventure in between.
And what do you like to cook? I saw you made pizza last week. Was that a while ago?
Well, I mean, I specialize in two things. So obviously from my years of working in the Caribbean, I specialize in Caribbean food. And
Oh, delicious. Next time in Cape Town, I'm coming for supper.
But I also do tend to go to Italian because Italian food is just fantastic. And I love Greek food and I love French food. I just love food, all sorts of food. So I call myself a writer and a speaker. And my genres of speciality are adventure, travel, and food.
And how do you stay so thin?
No, I'm not thin. Not at all. I used to be 30 kgs heavier than I am now. So if you watch, for example, my TED video, I was quite a different person to what I am right now. I stay thin by being on a bicycle, by walking. For example, I walked between Cape Point and Miller's Point just a few days ago. And next week I'm going to walk to Cape Agulhas from Arniston to Agulhas and things like that. So
I'm quite ignorant of those distances. What are we talking about?
The walk the other day was 20 k's over total elevation and decline of 2,000 meters, just under 2,000 meters.
And who do you walk with?
Different person every time. So my original idea with my Blind 2020 project was to have 20 different people guiding me for 20 different stages. But now it's looking more like it's going to be 10 people because everyone's had such a hard time. It's actually difficult to get a person to join you for a stage, specifically a person that you can trust to pilot you on a tandem bicycle, for example. So I'd rather complete the trip with people that I'm comfortable with, that I know I travel well with.
Yeah, that's probably safer as well.
And also I try to use specialists in each field. So when I'm kayaking, I want to be with the best possible kayaker that I can be with. And when I'm cycling, be with the best cyclist, for example. And on horseback, I wanted to be with the best horse guide on the horse next to me because I was scared.
So how about swimming with Lewis Pugh?
Yeah, I do it. I do it, no problem.
Shame his mom just died, I saw.
I've got a swimmer guy here, but man, the water's cold down there. Yeah,
Cape Town water is not pretty at all.
It's a little bit cold to be in. At least in the kayak, you get a little splash, but you don't get totally immersed.
Your kayak guy, would that be Rian Manser? Or is that?
Yeah, Rian's. So I'm paddling with two people. I'm paddling with Richard Kohler and with Terence Ward. So Terence Ward runs the Paddle Mag, and he runs a company called Kayaking Experiences. And yeah, I might kayak with Rian as well. We've been talking about it. We are friends. And he wrote the foreword for my first book. So we're personal friends. And Richard Kohler is about to be attempt to be the first guy to kayak across the Atlantic to Brazil from Cape Town. He's leaving in November. So these are amongst the best kayakers. In fact, Richard is undoubtedly the best kayaker that I know, long distance kayaker in South Africa.
I read an article about him. I think he's absolutely cooked in the head.
Very close to that.
I mean, how do you kayak?
He's the most mellow, gentle, competent, and comfortable guy. Your boat is massive to start with. Your boat is 6.5 meters long, and it's well equipped. And you just go, you just smile and go.
But you've got no space to move. You can't even stand up.
Well, his boat, you actually have a little cabin in the front where you can crawl into. If you want to, if the sea's too bad, you throw a drogue anchor out and you sleep it out. If the boat rolls or whatever happens, you just sleep it out.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I think
I wouldn't do it. That's a little bit harsh.
And there's no support.
But that said, in the next 2 weeks, I am going to paddle across False Bay. There's no support. So I'm going to paddle from Gordon's Bay to Kalk Bay.
Yeah.
Via Seal Island where all the white sharks are. We're going to go right over the top of them. So we also do some crazy things. Just for fun and kicks.
Does your wife think you're nuts?
Create good stories. She's a bit of an adventurous spirit herself. She loves travel, and she's done a lot of rock climbing all over the world. She's been to K2 base camp up in Pakistan, and she's been to Morocco, and she is. I chose. And young Tate, he's very quickly learning to be an adventurous spirit.
So you just stick him on your back and off you go.
Well, I'm busy building a new patio at the moment, so I have to box it in. And there was a massive pile of sand outside. And today that was Tate's personal Everest. He was climbing it and romping around in it. And helping the builders with as much destruction as he could.
Well, maybe, I'm sure he'll turn out like his father then.
Well, in some ways I hope, and in others I hope not.
Well, listen, you lead by example, and it seems the example you're setting is a pretty good one at the moment. You're certainly living a life that with no holds barred, quite frankly.
I guess that's my biggest fear. People's biggest fears are things like going blind, as we spoke earlier about. Things like going blind and suffocation and public speaking, and my biggest fear is growing old and having regrets.
Okay, well, regrets, I think one can't do. You know what? One doesn't have. I can't even say it in English. Apparently, you shouldn't have regrets. Never ever have regrets. Just live, and face each day with what it has to bring.
I just don't want to talk about all the stuff that I wish that I had done. I want to stand and look at something happening and say, you know what, I've done that. Not, I wish I did that. I wish that I'd crossed Africa. Well, I've done that. I wish that I'd crossed the US. Well, I've done that. I wish that I'd climbed a massive snow-capped volcano. I've done that. So it's almost like that makes me comfortable. And sometimes I fail. Sometimes I fail massively. We've had cycling things where we've had to stop because the wind is too strong. We can't cycle, and it gives me a target. It gives me a goal to go back and complete that route. It's not always easy. It's not meant to be easy. Anything worth winning cannot be won without a fight.
Christopher, what does 2021 hold for you?
Write a book.
Besides write a book.
Fight with an editor. Hopefully get to do a bit of travel. I have a speaker agent in Ireland who has been trying to line up some speaking work for me, a week's worth of speaking work for the last 2 years, but there's just been one obstacle after the next. And this year, of course, we've had the massive obstacle of the COVID-19. So hopefully there'll be a trip or two to Europe and perhaps one to the States to speak. And just enjoy some time with my boy, spend a bit of time at home and not yeah, if I'm going to go kayak, I want to go kayak with Tamlin and Tate, rather than with a professional kayaker who's up to conquer the world. I think it's a year, it's a break year. It's the year in between where I'm going to enjoy the comforts of being at home.
Okay. Is your goal in some way to produce a book a year?
No. A book every 2 or 3 years. Depends on the story.
So when can we expect book 3?
End of next year, book 3. And
okay, I'll watch out for that.
Within a year after that, book 4, because book 4 is already half done, and book 5 is already quarter done. So I kind of jump when I get tired of one, then I go on to something else. I've got a compilation of short stories that I'm busy with, and I want to have my hand at a couple of different things. So not always about adventure, but just about life lessons and challenges.
Who, if you could sit on a park bench and talk to anybody, who would it be?
Wow. I'd like to sit on that park bench and talk to my boy, but I'd like to see him. Does that count?
That does count. You put a perfect spin on it. Okay, so now I'm going to start crying. Barbara says, love your positivity and adventurous spirit. Well done. And she's absolutely right. I mean, staying positive in today's world is a challenge for anybody who is sighted. And quite frankly, you've taken it by the horns and have done more than the rest of us. So good on you, Christopher Fenter. I'm very impressed.
I've been through hell and back. My first book was a torturous story. I had a lot of challenges, a lot of problems with the guys I traveled with, problems with the areas that we encountered, issues, problems with getting sick and going blind ultimately. So that first book is not a story of all flowers and nice food. It's a story of torture and torment. It's a gauntlet, but it's a story of a true adventure rather than this.
You have a blog post, theblindscooterguy.com, is that right?
Yeah, my website's blindscooterguy.com.
Okay, I'll share that on the group. And I will share the link to your TED Talk as well.
There is a blog on there, and cool, yeah, there's a blog on there, and there's links to all sorts of podcasts and radio interviews and
where are your books available?
The nice big ones, and they're available through Take-A-Lot or directly from me for about a third of the price through the website. There's a page on the website that shows books for sale, so that I'll ship you anything.
Fantastic.
And overseas through Amazon, US, and Europe or sellers.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Chris, it's been a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us.
Thank you.
And everything of the best.
Already.
It's an hour already. We've been talking for an hour. I told you it was easy to get to an hour. You blink and the hour's gone. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody else, thank you so much. Tomorrow night, we're talking to Rala Xenopoulos, the author. She wrote the Bubble Schroeder story, and she's living in New York now with her triplets and her dog called Scott. Ouch. Love the chat, Mariana said. Chris, thank you. Good night, everyone. Have a wonderful, weekend almost. We're nearly there. Hang in there. A couple more sleeps. Bye, all.